Welcome to Exploration Dreamland, a quiet read aloud of the writings of explorers of the real world and the worlds of imagination. Drop anchor, relax into your comfortable bunk, and drift off to Dreamland with us as we read a lightly edited version of Pioneer Work in Opening the Medical Profession to Women, Autobiographical Sketches by Dr. Elizabeth Blackwell, published in 1895. The book will be read in order, so if you would like to begin at the beginning, please start with Season 2, Episode 26. If you would like to stay in touch between episodes, you can follow us on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook at Exploration Dreamland. If you would like to recommend a text, please email us at explorationdreamland, all one word, @gmail.com. You can also find our episodes on YouTube. Please subscribe or follow and review us wherever you find us. Your actions will help others find us too. Now, take a deep breath in, and as you exhale, relax any tension in your muscles. Close your eyes, snuggle into your sleeping space, and listen to tonight's tale. The following letter, written by a younger brother who came to be with me on this important occasion, gives some interesting as well as amusing details of the event. Geneva, January 23, 1849. Beloved relations, the important crisis is past, the great occasion over. The object of so much and so justifiable anticipation has been attained, and proud as I always feel of the Blackwells, my familism never seemed to me so reasonable and so perfectly a matter of course as it did this morning, when, having escorted E into the crowded church and taken my seat beside her, we learned from the music that the graduating class, headed by the dean, trustees, faculty, etc., were marching in solemn conclave into the aisle. I found E well and in good spirits, as you may suppose. Monday morning, E and I went to the college, where she underwent a second examination, as did also the other members of the graduating class, from the curators of the university. No others but themselves, the class, and the faculty being admitted. From this, as from the former one, our Cis came off with flying colors and the reputation of being altogether the leader of the class. In the afternoon they were successively called upon to read from their theses, and to this I was admitted, but Elizabeth's being in Buffalo to be printed, she could not be called upon. The professor and students all seem to feel most kindly and warmly friendly. While I sat by the stove on Monday morning at the college, whilst the graduating class were undergoing their examination below, the other students, scarcely any of them being acquainted with my personality, conversed freely about matters and things, and of course about Elizabeth. "Well, boys," one would say, "our Elib feels first-rate this morning. Do you notice how pleased she looks?" "Yes, indeed," replied another, "and I think she well may after the examination she passed yesterday." "So Lizzie will get her diploma after all," said a third. "If any member of the class gets one, she is sure of it," said a fourth. Then all agreed that our Elib was a great girl, and in short, I found that she was a universal favorite with both professors and students. Nothing could be more cordial than the former are, and several are very gentlemanly and intelligent men indeed, and I formed some pleasant acquaintances among them. On the morning of the commencement, little Dr. Webster was in his glory. He is a warm supporter of Elizabeth, and likes a fuss, and nothing could exceed his delight when he found that the whole country round was sending in large numbers of people, and that all the ladies of Geneva were turning out en masse to see a lady receive a medical diploma. At 10 o'clock a.m., the students met at the college and marched in procession with music to the Literary College, where they were headed by the Bishop of New York, Dr. Hale, the dean, and the curators, the faculty, etc. Dr. Webster was very anxious that E should march in procession, and sent down 2 messages to that effect, but E very properly refused. About 10:30 o'clock, Elizabeth and I walked up to the church. She was very nicely dressed in her black brocaded silk gown, invisibly green gloves, black silk stockings, etc. As we ascended the college steps, Dr. Webster met Elizabeth and again urged the request, whereupon she told him peremptorily that it wouldn't be ladylike. "Wouldn't it indeed? Why, no, I forgot, I suppose it wouldn't," said the little doctor, evidently struck for the first time with the idea. So it was arranged that Elizabeth and I should sit down at the entrance of the left aisle and join the procession as it came up, and we then walked in and sat down. We found the church, galleries and all, crowded with ladies, they only having been as yet admitted, and of course when we came in there was a general stir and murmur, and everybody turned to look at us. By the time the procession came up, all the pews, except those reserved for students, were filled, and the gentlemen had to pour in afterwards and take the aisles, etc. When the procession entered, Mr. Field, a very pleasant, gentlemanly fellow graduate, offered his arm, and all the class took their seats together in front of the stage. After a short discourse by Dr. Hale, the president, the diplomas were conferred, 4 being called up at a time, and ascending the steps to the platform, the president addressed them in a Latin formula, taking off his hat, but remaining seated, and so handed them their diplomas, which they received with a bow and retired. Elizabeth was left to the last and called up alone. The president, taking off his hat, rose and, addressing her in the same formula, substituting domina for domine, presented her the diploma, whereupon our Sis, who had walked up and stood before him with much dignity, bowed and half turned to retire, but suddenly turning back, replied, "Sir, I thank you. By the help of the Most High, it shall be the effort of my life to shed honor upon your diploma." Whereupon she bowed, and the president bowed. The audience gave manifestations of applause. Little Dr. Webster rubbed his hands. The learned curators and faculty nodded grave approbation at each other upon the platform, and our Sis, descending the steps, took her seat with her fellow physicians in front. Now walks up into the pulpit Professor Lee, with a large manuscript and a solemn air, and commences his address to the graduates. It was on the whole good. He gave it pretty strong to homeopathists, hydropathists, mesmerists, Thompsonians, etc., and gave the ladies of the audience quite a lecture for their encouragement and circulation of quack medicines, informing them that they had better study a little the principles of medicine before attempting to practice what they were so profoundly ignorant about. At the close, he alluded to the novel proceeding which they had taken, and the censure or imitation which it would necessarily create. He justified the proceeding, and passed a most gratifying and enthusiastic encomium on the result of the experiment in the case of Elizabeth. He pronounced her the leader of her class, stated that she had passed through a thorough course in every department, slighting none, that she had profited to the very utmost by all the advantages of the institution, and by her ladylike and dignified deportment had proved that the strongest intellect and nerve and the most untiring perseverance were compatible with the softest attributes of feminine delicacy and grace, etc., to all which the students manifest by decided attempts at applause their entire concurrence. As the audience passed out, the bishop came up with Dr. Hale, requested an introduction, and spoke very pleasantly, congratulating her on her course, to the great astonishment of the conservatives. As we walked out of the church, we found that almost all the ladies had stopped outside, and as we appeared, opened their ranks and let us pass, regarding E with very friendly countenances. Most of E's time was taken up till our departure next day at 1:30 in receiving calls from her few friends. The admission of a woman for the first time to a complete medical education and full equality in the privileges and the responsibilities of the profession produced a widespread effect in America. The public press very generally recorded the event and expressed a favorable opinion of it. Even in Europe some notice was taken, and Punch showed his cordial appreciation by his amusing but friendly verses. Footnote 5. Appendix 2. An M.D. in a gown. The Medical Times contains a full, true, and particular account of the admission of a young lady, Miss Elizabeth Blackwell, by the General Medical College in the state of New York, to a physician's degree. Miss Blackwell had duly attended lectures at the college and received a formal diploma under the title of Domina, which was the only feminine that the Senate could find for doctor. Punch really thinks this is a case for a copy of verses which he accordingly subjoins in honor of the fair M.D. Not always is the warrior male, nor masculine the sailor. We all know Zaragossa's tale, we've all heard Billy Taylor. But far a nobler heroine she, who won the palm of knowledge, and took a medical degree by study at her college. They talk about the gentler sex, mankind in sickness tending, and o'er the patient's couch their necks solicitously bending. But what avails solicitude in fever or in tisic, if lovely woman's not imbued with one idea of physic? Young ladies all of every clime, especially of Britain, who wholly occupy your time in novels or in knitting, whose highest skill is but to play, sing, dance, or French to clack well, reflect on the example, pray, of excellent Miss Blackwell. Think if you had a brother ill, a husband, or a lover, and could prescribe the draught or pill whereby he might recover. How much more useful this would be, O sister, wife, or daughter, than merely handing him beef tea, gruel, or toast and water. Ye bachelors about to wed in youth's unthinking heyday, who look upon a furnished head as horrid for a lady, who'd call a female doctor blue, you'd spare your sneers, I rather think, my young fellows, if you knew what physic costs a father. How much more blessed were married life to men of small condition, if every one could have his wife for family physician, his nursery kept from ailments free by proper regulation, and for advice his only fee, a thankful salutation. For Doctrix Blackwell, that's the way to dub in rightful gender. In her profession ever may prosperity attend her. Punch, a gold-handled parasol suggests for presentation to one so well deserving all esteem and admiration. 1849. End footnote. I knew, however, that a first step only had been taken. Although popular sanction had been gained for the innovation and a full recognized status secured, yet much more medical experience than I possessed was needed before the serious responsibilities of practice could be justly met. Returning, therefore, to Philadelphia, I endeavored still to continue my studies. I was politely received by the heads of the profession in Philadelphia as a professional sister, and made the following notes in a journal of that date. March 6, a morning of great gratification. Welcomed cordially to the university, and afterwards heard Doctors Jackson, Hodges, Gibson, Chapman, and Horner lecture. Doctors Lee and Ford were with me, the former quite in spirits at my reception. March 10. Heard Dr. Williamson lecture and received his ticket. Visited the Pennsylvania Hospital, Dr. Levitch showing me over it, admired the gallery with its alcoves and the excellent ventilation. I heard Professor Agassiz last night. He has just commenced a course of lectures on the animal world. His manner was simple and earnest, and the principles he laid down will render his course of lectures very interesting if he develop them fully. I am also rubbing up my French, which may be very important to me. The following letter is characteristic of that period of life. February 25. My dear mother, you sent me a dear, good, welcome letter, and I kiss you heartily for all its affection and sympathy in my eccentric course. I did not miss out either any of the pious parts, but I do think, mother mine, that it is a little hard that you will not believe me when I tell you so seriously that my soul is doing first rate. You urge upon me the importance of religion. Why, bless the dear mother, what am I doing else but living religion all the time? Isn't it my meat and my drink to do the good will of God? Didn't I used to sit in the lecture room and send up a whole cannonade of little prayers? And didn't a whole flood of answers come straight down from the throne of grace? And what am I doing now? Do you think I care about medicine? Nay, verily, it's just to kill the devil whom I hate so heartily. That's the fact, mother. And if that isn't forming Christ in one, the hope of glory, why, I don't know what is. So pray comfort yourself, and have faith that such a child of many prayers will be fixed up all straight at last. I live in a good society, the fellowship of hard workers, for however little the result of my actions may be, I have the strengthening conviction that my aim is right, and that I, too, am working after my little fashion for the redemption of mankind. I agree with you fully in distrusting the harbinger, and should certainly banish it from my center table if I had risen to the dignity of possessing one. I dislike their discussions and their way of discussing some subjects. I think them calculated to do a great deal of mischief, and am only consoled by the reflection that few people read them. I go in whole-souledly for the divine marriage institution, and shall always support it by precept, and as soon as I get the chance, by example too, and all those who would upset it I consider fools and infidels. I think associationists too often a very poor set of people, and if they would commence by reforming themselves, and let the Almighty take care of the world, I think they would be much better employed. As to the infidel French philosophy you talk of, it is just twaddle, which I should instantly reject if anybody were to stuff it into me. I am now longing to be at work abroad, where I might spend my time much more profitably, but I do want greatly to see you all again. How long it is since I was at home! More than 5 years, I think. I cannot consent to become a stranger to the Geschwistern, and W and E seem almost unknown. Goodbye, dear mother. I shall see you soon, and then you will be able to read me sermons to your heart's content. Your M.D. I felt, however, keenly the need of much wider opportunities for study than were open to women in America. Whilst considering this problem, I received an invitation from one of my cousins, then visiting America, to return with him to England and endeavor to spend some time in European study before engaging in practice in America. This valuable offer was joyfully accepted, and I prepared for a journey to Europe, first of all paying a short farewell visit to my family in Cincinnati. Extracts from the Journal. April 5. How kind and good and glad to see me they all were. I walked out with S and met them all. G had quite grown out of my knowledge. I am very glad to have spent this fortnight at home. We had general and private talks without end. April 7. They all came down to see me off. They stood on the adjoining boat as we sailed away up the river. Mother leaning on S, the 3 sisters on one side, H and G on the other, all hearts in sympathy. I could not keep down the tears as I caught the last glimpse of those dear true ones. Traveling east, I joined my cousin in Boston, whence we sailed for Liverpool. April 18. Dear Mr. Channing was with me till I left. His medical uncle, Dr. Channing, also came to see me. I never met my old friend more fully. He regretted deeply this flying visit, which disappointed him in the talks he had planned. Beautiful Boston Bay vanished in the distance. America, that land of memories, was left far behind. I took to my berth and lay there in misery 5 days and nights. How I loathed the ship! Chapter 4. Study in Europe, 1849 to 1851. On April 30, we landed at Liverpool, and I began to make acquaintance with the wonderful and unknown old world which I had left when a child of 11. Everything seemed new and striking. The substantial character of Liverpool, the finished look of the surrounding country, the extraordinary character of the mining district, all awakened keen interest. My poor cousin being ill with rheumatism, however, we journeyed on at once to his home at Portway Hall, near Dudley. A fortnight was spent in this pleasant home, which, though in the center of the Black Country, was surrounded by gardens where the flowers were fresh and sweet, the trees in beautiful leaf, whilst the cuckoo saluted us in the morning and the nightingales at night. I gained a glimpse of the lovely English country and spent a memorable time in examining the novel surroundings of the great mining district of England. The following letters are descriptive of a young student's impressions on revisiting her native land more than a generation ago. Portway, May 2, 1849. Thanks be to heaven, I am on land once more, and never do I wish again to experience that hideous nightmare, a voyage across the ocean. We had the warmest welcome at my cousin's pleasant home. I went one afternoon to see the casting, that is, when the melted iron, like a river of fire, flows into the molds which shape it. The Russell Hall works are close by the town of Dudley. There is a wide extent of smoky country, with many little groups of machinery and brick buildings, each constituting, or rather surrounding, a pit. Many mounds of glowing coal turning into coke, piles of ironstone being burned previous to the smelting, the houses of the managers in various directions, the office at the entrance, and immediately in front the two great blast furnaces, which burn incessantly day and night, making many thousands of tons a year. Very few workmen were to be seen, but underground a whole army of them were hard at work. The casting was very curious. Twice a day the melted iron is drawn off from the bottom of the great brick towers they call furnaces. Strong men with faces as black and scorched as a coal were busy, armed with iron poles, guiding the sea of fire that rushed out into the molds that covered a great extent of ground, drawing out the white-hot masses of cinders and dirt, and splashing cold water over the front of the furnace to enable them to stand there. We remained at the farther end, but the heat was so great that we had to cover our faces. Suddenly, with a loud noise, the flames burst out from the furnaces, ascending to the very top. Immense volumes of black smoke rolled over our heads, and the rushing noise grew louder and louder. I thought some accident had occurred, and looked out for the safest retreat, when I found it was only the clearing of the furnaces by sending a powerful blast through them, which was always practiced after a casting. Within a square of 12 miles, 1/6 of the iron used in the world is said to be made. I paid a visit to Dudley Castle, having a great curiosity to see a veritable old castle, a ruined castle, and I explored every corner, looked up the broad chimneys, and peeped out of the stone window frames and loopholes with a feeling of true antiquarian enthusiasm. We sat down on a stone bench at the foot of the keep, which is very old, and on a little hill on the western side of the courtyard. There we tried to revive the scene as it may have looked hundreds of years ago, when armed men were bustling about the court, and visions of fair ladies gleaming from the upper windows and now ruined terraces. The castle crowns a wooded hill, commanding the town and level country for many miles. The remains of a double wall with a moat between still surround the castle. As I stood by those strong walls and looked down on the wide fields below, I began to imagine how grandly an army would approach, and how noble a defense the castle would make, till I longed to revive the ancient conflicts and almost frightened my companions by my martial demonstrations and visions of grim warriors peeping through the iron-barred windows. But the illusion could not last long. The country is covered with smoke and coal pits. The wallflower is smiling on the ruins of the old castle, and instead of subterranean dungeons and dark passages, the hill is excavated for limestone, and these artificial caverns of enormous extent, with a canal winding through them and echoing to the voices of the workmen, form one of the most curious features of the place, and show how the same energy and power are still at work, though in a very different direction. We drove home through the little town of Dudley, which presented a most curious spectacle, for it was market day, and the workmen from all the country round, having received their wages, were come in with their wives and children to make their weekly purchases. The streets were crammed with people, and our carriage made its way through a living mass that hardly opened to let it through. In Liverpool, I had peered into all the back alleys and odd corners I could find. I have done the same in Dudley. There is great cleanliness observed everywhere that compares most favorably with American cities, and the inhabitants of those districts, though miserable, of course, according to a true standard of human life, were neither more numerous nor more wretched than I have been accustomed to see in America. I have very rarely seen a beggar, and in no instance one that has particularly excited my compassion. This district is one of the most thickly peopled in England, and certainly presents an average view of the mining districts, and the poor laborers seem far more comfortable and intelligent than I had supposed. The manufacturing districts, I have no doubt, would present a different spectacle. I have had no opportunity of judging them. I have just learned, to my great satisfaction, that Mr. Charles Plevens, an old friend of my cousin, is going to London for a few days and will escort me there and remain during my stay. I can hardly tell you what a relief this is, for the idea of going to that great city an entire stranger and wandering about it utterly alone was a most desolate, oppressive thought, and entirely destroyed all the pleasure of the anticipation, though I assumed a very independent tone in speaking of my journey when I found it was utterly impossible for cousin to accompany me. He is an old friend of cousin's, though young, only 25, and there is an air of youth and immaturity about all his opinions and actions, but his spirit is so beautiful that you have only to see it in order to love it, so pure and gentle, so true and genial. In my opinion, he belongs to a class of young Englishmen that I find is large and constantly increasing. Cousin S. is one of them. They are reformers in spirit, but not destroyers. They have no clear immediate plan of reform, and so earnestly maintain the present system until they find a better one. But they are all the time seeking for truth and longing most earnestly to realize that grand future in which they all believe. Fichte is one of their favorite teachers. Carlyle, Emerson, Channing, all we have known and learned from in the past, they worship now, but they have yet to study Fourier and Swedenborg before they can reach that strong hope and clear insight which will make their working strong, happy, and practically efficient. Now there is too much of metaphysical abstraction in their thoughts. Their religious faith is not a glorious reality, and in case of our friend Charles, he despises the material world too much and seeks to subdue the body and purify the spirit by privations which proceed from the noblest motive but a mistaken faith. I have a curious interest in seeing and hearing him. It revives so completely my earlier life when I thought as he does now and strove for the same ends by the same means. My medical effort won his admiration before I arrived, and since I came here, he has done me every little service in his power. His family is an old and highly respected one in Birmingham, and when he found I wished to see something of medicine in the city, he used his influence to arrange a useful day for me. Accordingly, the day before yesterday, I went in with him to Birmingham, having received invitations from several physicians. We spent the day in visiting the various institutions together, and as it was my first introduction to the English medical world, and as I consider it a good omen, I must describe our doings particularly. Mr. Parker, surgeon to the Queen's Hospital, had some difficulty in believing that it was not an ideal being that was spoken of, but when he found I was really and truly a living woman, he sent me an invitation to witness the amputation he was going to perform, and promised to show me all the arrangements of the institution, sending also a note of admission to the college and museum. Dr. Evans, a distinguished physician, invited me to the General Hospital, the largest and oldest one, and expressed much sympathy in my undertaking. Dr. Mackay, of the Lying-in Hospital, thought that God and nature had indicated the unfitness of women for such a pursuit as I had chosen, but still said he would be very happy to show the lady all he could. All the students were on the qui-vive to see the lady surgeon, and as we approached the building, I saw them peeping through doors and windows. Mr. Parker, a fat, rosy-faced John Bull, received me very politely, introduced me to some MDs who had come to see the sight, showed me the arrangements of the hospital, which is young and not particularly interesting, and then took me to the operating room. It was crammed with students, and as fresh ones arrived, they would peep about, whisper to their neighbors, and then work their way to a place where they could see me. It was just a repetition of old scenes, a few minutes' curiosity, and then all went on as usual. The students presented the same mixture of faces as our American ones, wore rather better coats, and seemed to be quicker in their movements. I noticed nothing peculiar in the operation, which was skillfully performed without chloroform, which Mr. Parker disliked. Before leaving, he offered me a letter to the famous Rue of Paris. At the General Hospital, established 60 years, Dr. Heslop received me with the utmost deference, showed me every ward, male and female, pointed out every case of note, let me examine it, and detailed the treatment, particularly one operation for subclavian aneurysm, which was so remarkable that they were going to publish the case. Dr. Percy of Birmingham, a particular friend of S., has promised to meet me in London and to furnish me with all the necessary introduction to give me an insight into the medical world of the great metropolis. So I look forward now with great hope to a short but delightful visit, and leave for London next Saturday, the 12th, to await my passports, which I shall probably receive with letters on the 16th, and then off again for the land of dancing and wooden shoes. I heard the cuckoo this morning. What a soft human sound it is! Last night the nightingales were singing sweetly in the twilight. Our garden is full of lovely English flowers. The primrose and cowslip, laurestine, and many others make our garden beautiful, though the weather is a most cold, gloomy nurse to the little darlings. May 17. We left Portway yesterday afternoon. I parted from our friends with great regret. We were getting used to one another. A home feeling was growing up there to me, and so it was time to be off. We arrived late in London, so I could only remark the many handsome houses in gardens that marked its environs, the fine and spacious orderly railway station, the wide streets and gay shops. This morning, after seeing Dr. Percy, Cousin S.'s friend, who has promised to give me the necessary introductions to the hospitals tomorrow, we walked about 5 miles through the city before reaching Mrs. X's house in Devonshire Street. During our walk, we passed through many handsome squares with monuments and public buildings, not an isolated one, as with us, but row after row of grand pillared edifices, whole streets of palaces, substantial, built of freestone, but all rendered dingy by smoke, which permeates the atmosphere and penetrates everywhere. The most venerable pile of Westminster Abbey is crumbling with age. The cathedral service was being chanted when we entered. The central space was filled with people. The aisles are in the form of a cross, bordered by tall pillars rising lofty and plain to support the long vistas of arches. The spaces are filled up by a wilderness of monuments. A subdued light pouring in, a cool, stony atmosphere filling the cathedral. It is a noble old building and has impressed me more than anything I've seen. From Westminster Bridge, I saw the new Houses of Parliament, an immense pile, the ornaments too delicate for its size. The poor little river was covered with boats, and the bridge with people enjoying the Sunday. But London was much quieter than I supposed it would be. I noticed but one confectionery store partly open. The day seemed to be very strictly observed. We walked through Regent Street and through endless rows of handsome houses constituting the West End to Mrs. X's. We were shown in by a footman in crimson plus breeches, white stockings, and claret-colored coat with gold buttons to the drawing-rooms, the walls lined with figured crimson velvet, and all manner of lounges and tables covered with knick-knackery scattered about. The lady made her appearance in a blue and black satin dress with jet ornaments and a lace headdress, a handsome brunette with red cheeks and very black eyes and hair, and altogether too much mannerism to please me. She was evidently criticizing me and holding herself in a non-committal attitude. I sat still and talked very quietly, thinking to myself that if I were condemned to live there 1 week, I should overturn the lady and smash everything to atoms. Presently, a few fashionable morning visitors dropped in to condole with the lady, who had scratched her throat by swallowing a mouthful too hastily, and so was an invalid. Some messages of inquiry and condolence were delivered by an old grave footman, so very silly, and answered in so absurd a manner that I wondered how the man could keep a grave countenance. And yet the lady had wit and spirit which occasionally flashed out. Sir J. H. came in with Dr. H. to see me. I had a little very pleasant talk, and am to meet him on Tuesday. We descended to lunch, ladies sitting down in their bonnets. The dining room and library had ceilings beautifully painted to imitate the sky with clouds. The whole house was hung with paintings. The lady's manner grew gradually pleasanter. She seemed to like me, admired my hand, and insisted on my drinking a glass of wine, the first I ever took. I told her so, and she was much pleased at her influence. She took us in her barouche through Regent's Park, and then extended her drive to Hyde Park. These parks are very beautiful. Miles of grassy lawn, scattered over with groves, gardens, and clumps of trees, with occasional water, and varied with little valleys. They are surrounded by rows of palace houses, sometimes approaching the carriage road, sometimes lost in gardens and shrubbery. I did enjoy to see the people walking about, sitting under the trees, inhaling a little fresh air on the quiet Sunday, for the most perfect order prevailed. Our hostess became quite agreeable, laughed and chatted merrily about all manner of nothings. It was impossible to converse with her. She must do the talking with a little support, and she gave forth a good deal of shrewd worldly wisdom. She set us down at the Zoological Gardens in Regent's Park, with many regrets that an engagement to a dinner party in the country prevented her asking me home, and the expression of a strong desire to have a long, full conversation. Monday, May 1849. This morning I called on Dr. Carpenter, who has written those admirable works on physiology. He lives near Regent's Park. It was sparkling with dew as I walked through, refreshingly sweet. I found him and his wife exceedingly agreeable. I liked them at once. They questioned me with great interest about my past course. I am to meet some distinguished people at their house tonight, and among them a Miss Gillies, an artist who has watched my steps with the highest pleasure, and who thinks the only true livers are the workers. I received several notes of introduction from Dr. C. He says I must hear Mr. Paget lecture, that he is the most promising surgeon in England. I found an invitation to a pharmaceutical soirée awaiting me on my return, with the information that I might see all the distinguished M.D.s there assembled. Evening. I have just returned from Dr. C.'s delightful little party. The ladies were in regular ball costume, some dresses very elegant, dancing to the piano, music, vocal and instrumental. Dr. C. gave us a very beautiful piece of Mendelssohn's on the organ. He and his wife sang together with great feeling. His microscopes, said to be the most beautiful in England, were there. His preparations were exquisite. The lung of a frog most minutely injected, a piece of shark skin which seems covered with innumerable teeth, and piles of other specimens. Miss Gillies is a distinguished artist. I am to visit her and see her relation, Dr. Southwood Smith. Chapman, the well-known publisher, was present and talked a good deal to me, but seemed a little undecided what tone to take. He has a very handsome, intellectual face. I was introduced to many pleasant people. One had the rare, beautiful face of Cowper's mother. Great interest seemed to be felt in my course. Before going to Dr. C.'s, I went to examine the specimens collected for the pharmaceutical soirée. I was surprised to find that the papier-mâché models have been hitherto unknown in England, and that the people were regarding with the utmost rapture specimens which are in common use in all American colleges. Sir J. H. drove us to the Consumption Hospital and the Chelsea Botanical Gardens. A most kind-hearted, simple-mannered old gentleman. Dr. Percy secured me a great treat. I visited the Hunterian Museum in company with Mr. Owen, who lectures at the institution. It is said to be the finest collection of comparative and morbid anatomy in the world. Mr. Owen is a man of genius, and the hour passed away like a minute while listening to his eloquent descriptions of the fossil remains and the laws which related them to living animals, to man, and to the globe. He invited me to come any morning between 10 and 12, but unfortunately my time is too crowded. The obstetric collection is very fine. If I return through London, I shall certainly try to spend a week or two in examining it. We next took the railroad and went to Greenwich, choosing the third-class open cars that I might see the country, which is laid out in market gardens richly cultivated, all round London, through the city, stretching out through Deptford to Greenwich, which makes one uninterrupted town in that direction. Greenwich Hospital for Sailors has impressed me more than any other institution with the power and wealth of the nation. It is a series of great palaces connected by colonnades with double rows of pillars ranged round a large green open to the river, with the park and observatory in the background. The old sailors were hobbling about in comfortable dresses with enormous rations of bread and meat, for we reached it just at dinner time, and they were allowed to take their meals and eat in their cabins. There are long walks where they smoke, and they rove about in the freest style. Their chapel is a very beautiful hall, though I fear the rich painting and mosaic is lost on the rough tars. The painted hall is immediately opposite. The vaulted ceiling is covered with figures which are larger than life, even from below. The walls are entirely covered with large paintings, richly framed, of naval engagements and naval heroes, and many relics of the great commanders are preserved in cases. The park is always open to the public. Groups of women and children were sitting under the fine old trees, and the deer were so tame that they took no notice of passers-by. We sailed up the river to Waterloo Bridge, passing the Tower and St. Paul's and several handsome stone bridges. Then we went over the British Museum, which is thrown open to the public. We had only time to pass rapidly through hall after hall devoted to branches of natural science, Egyptian monuments, Grecian remains, etc., all admirably classified with a label to every specimen. I hastened home to wash and dress and reached Mrs. X's just in time for the 7 o'clock dinner. It was a tremendous operation. We sat at table for 3 hours. I really grew stiff, notwithstanding the champagne I drank. By the by, that is the only wine I like. Iced champagne is really good. I sat by Sir J. H. at table and never discovered till I had left that it was actually Mother's old friend. He told Charles that he knew my mother and remembered my face perfectly, having often seen me at church. I regretted exceedingly that I did not know the connection till too late, for I had always liked the kind old gentleman, and he would have seemed to me quite like an old friend. He has been rather unfortunate in money matters lately, and was robbed of all his family jewels by a foreign count and countess whom he was hospitably entertaining. He possesses an old chateau in France, which he often visits, and gave me his card to use at Boulogne in case I went that way. The general conversation, however, was stupid, and I really needed our 3-mile walk home to wear off its constraining effects. Thursday morning, I visited my first hospital, St. Thomas's, but under rather unpleasant circumstances. Indeed, I hesitated whether to go at all. The surgeon to whom I sent my letter of introduction knew nothing about me, thought it was a very indelicate undertaking, and simply sent me a line to one of the nurses with the request that I would not enter any of the men's wards. I swallowed the indignity, however, and went, feeling very uncomfortable. But to my surprise, after I had been there a little while, I was met by Mr. South, the senior surgeon, who had come on purpose to meet me and show me everything. A very kind, rather eccentric man, who paid me the utmost attention and pointed out everything, even to the everlasting brew-house of the establishment. In the museum he drew my attention to many noteworthy specimens, such as the aorta tied by Sir Astley Cooper. St. Thomas's is a series of enormous buildings, which is the character of most public institutions here. Then he invited me to attend his clinical lecture, so at the head of a large body of students, who had been peeping at me in every direction, I passed with him through ward after ward, men's and women's, the students preserving the most perfect order, though I could see that they were filled with the intensest curiosity. He gave me the fullest description of interesting cases and made me examine several. He left his students to the house surgeon and accompanied me to the Barclay Brewery, an enormous affair, quite a national curiosity. It was here that the brutal Jeanneau, while visiting the place a short time ago, was mobbed by the men when they heard who had come amongst them, and barely escaped some very rough usage. My courteous escort left me in the kindliest manner, promising me an introduction to the Bethlehem. While at St. Thomas's, I received 3 invitations to post-mortems, to a lecture, and to the ophthalmic dispensary, all of which I was compelled to decline for want of time. At the brewery, visitors enter their names. I set mine down without the M.D. Mr. South insisted on my adding it. I have been asked by physicians again and again if they shall call me doctor. They fully recognize my right. I always answer this question in the affirmative as a matter of principle. I can hardly describe to you the difference of feeling with which I entered and left the hospital. We walked a couple of miles to dine with Mr. and Mrs. Charles T., an elegant household, though without the fetters of fashion. They welcomed me most kindly. My 2 remaining days will be very busy. I have 2 or 3 hospitals to visit and several people to see. Indeed, engagement treads upon engagement, so that I've hardly a moment to think. I thought such excitement would have bothered me intensely. It did at first bewilder, but now I've roused myself to meet it, and I really enjoy it. I've never had such an experience. I must have walked 10 miles a day. I come home sometimes hardly able to move a foot. I wash and dress, and in an hour I'm up again and fresh for as much more. The more I have to do, the more I can. I believe I've never yet begun to call out my power of working. The girl has just come in with my letters, passport, and papers by the Europa. What a good sight. Bless you all 10,000 times. My next letter will probably be from Paris. Stay tuned for the next segment from Pioneer Work in Opening the Medical Profession to Women by Dr. Elizabeth Blackwell. Please follow, rate, and review us on your favorite podcast app. Keep in touch with us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube, and recommend us to anyone you know who could use a quiet break or a little help falling asleep. Exploration Dreamland is produced, edited, and hosted by me, Sarah Van Zaley. A big thank you to Project Gutenberg for helping me find this and many other interesting publications. Thanks also to Kevin MacLeod at Incompetech.com for providing the theme music for this show. The title of this piece is Kalimba Relaxation Music, if you would like to visit his website to hear it in its entirety. Sweet dreams.